welcome. I'm bringing Brooklyn in the house. Come on in.
Okay, cameras are speeding.
I started this show in 2009 with Brooklyn Savvy set in different living rooms. So the best way to celebrate 20 seasons is to bring it home, literally. I wanted to create a safe space to have uncomfortable yet transformative conversations that move people, amplifying the voices of those who are underrepresented and who inspire positive change. I'm Toni Williams, and this is Brooklyn Savvy. Brooklyn Savvy covers a diverse range of topics and stories, and there are those few that are so personal that I'm sure it touches and moves you the way it does me. We're celebrating 20 seasons of Brooklyn Savvy, and one of our beloved panelistas, Jennifer Jones Austin, shares her health triumph. Now, this is the second part of our two-part episode on Jennifer Jones Austin. And again, thank you so much for being in your home. You've been quite a wonderful hostess to us. I'm going to, though, ask you to, again, just share with us your story for those viewers who may not have tuned in to the episode before.
So I'll begin by telling you all that I am a cancer survivor. In September 2009, 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with leukemia, an environmentally caused leukemia. I woke up on a Friday morning.
Now, environmentally caused.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
What that means is that when I was, let me back up and just tell you that the way the cancer presented itself, I woke up with a flu-like fever. It was a Friday morning. I went through the day. I actually went on and had a board meeting and took tons of Tylenol to bring the fever down, made it through the board meeting and came home and went to bed. Woke up the next morning or woke up through the night and was like wringing wet, like my clothes, they were just taking up and wringing out the perspiration. Woke up on Saturday, still had a fever, went to the hospital and was told by the hospital, oh, probably some type of like gastroenteritis, some viral infection. Take some Advil, sleep it off, you'll be fine. Went through Sunday, no change. Monday morning, I woke up and I couldn't see.
Oh my goodness, because I was wondering what, right.
I was blind. That was
And the hospital
kind of
sent
like,
you home, but you know, that happens.
That happens, right?
Yes.
That was kind of the catalytic moment, like something's very wrong here.
Right.
Called up my doctor, she said, you need to come on in. Went to see her at her office, and within like 2 minutes of seeing me, she said, we've got to send you by ambulance. I can't do anything for you. Wow. About 36 hours later, I laid in hospital bed, and a doctor came to see my husband and me, and he looked me in the face and he said, you have leukemia.
And what went through your mind? What did you feel
So you
in
all
that
are
moment?
just getting to know me.
Sure.
But I will tell you that I am a person who, I believe that no one goes through this life if they're truly living life without something happening.
Oh, absolutely.
We're all in agreement.
So I, in some ways, I would often think about, I have 2 children, I have a husband, I have a good family life, I have a wonderful mother, had a great father, wonderful siblings, great nieces, nephews.
And then when's that shoe gonna fall?
Wonderful career. I do what I want to do. I feel like I make a difference in this world. I knew that shoe was going to drop at some point. I didn't know what it was,
Or
but I would, but I would pray. I would pray that whatever came, I would be ready for it. So when the doctor looked at me and said, you have leukemia, he told my family later that he'd never gotten the response like I'd given him. I just looked right back at him and I said, so what do we do?
Right. Like little tap.
So no tears.
No
just
tears.
Automatically
Like,
into how
But
we're going to open
What
inside,
do we do?
Jennifer, you know, you get that thing in your,
She was in
or
a
it was
tough
just an issue.
I'm not going to say I am like Superwoman,
Right.
but we all got to go through something.
Right.
Absolutely.
And later in the day, my mother still to this day tells people that I just looked at her and I said, don't cry. It's part of my journey.
But what about your children?
Did
Did you tell them immediately?
So the leukemia presented in my lungs, and the blindness, the fever, and all those were just side effects, manifestations, other symptoms. But it presented in my lungs. As a
Was
result,
there anything before that?
Not a thing. I'm talking about, you know, I don't want to say that I was, you know, ready to do an Ironman, but nothing. I was the epitome of good health. I ate well. I exercised regularly. I was, you know, like, you know, probably had a very, very strong body mass index. I was good to go. It just happened. And when it presented in my lungs, I lost the ability to breathe on my own. They had to put me on, they had to intubate me and put me in ICU. And then it went downhill from there very rapidly. So I was diagnosed on a Wednesday, and on that Friday, they told my husband that I probably wouldn't make it through the weekend.
Oh my goodness.
So my husband, being the guy that he is, who just deals, decided he had to bring my children to the hospital. At the time, they were 7 and 12, and he had to bring them to the hospital to say goodbye to Mom. So I was in an induced coma, intubated, didn't know what was happening, but he took the reins and he brought them to the hospital, and they said their goodbyes to their mommy.
But you were under at this point.
I was under. What
Did
the
you
doctors,
hear? Do you remember any of this?
I knew nothing.
You don't remember.
What the doctors did was they realized that never before had they given chemo to somebody who was in an induced coma, but that's what they had to do. They had to try to keep me on this, you know, breathing support, while at the same time keep me sedated, and thirdly, give me the chemo, treat the chemo. They administered the chemotherapy for 10 days, then they brought me out of the coma, and I was in remission. And then we learned that in order to survive the disease long term, because a result of the leukemia was a broken chromosome, which makes it more likely that the disease will return, I would need a bone marrow transplant.
What hospital were you in? Can I ask? Is that appropriate?
Absolutely. I began my treatment. I was taken via ambulance. There was no discussion about where I would go. I wound up at St. Vincent's. St. Vincent's, which is closed today,
now.
but it was there for me when I needed it. Right? And from there, I went to New York Presbyterian, because your care is only as good as the doctors who treat you. And Dr. Halpern at St. Vincent's knew he was not a leukemia specialist. He knew that he needed to call on the top people in New York City, and he reached out to New York Presbyterian and got a woman by the name of Dr. Gail Robos involved.
So Jennifer, when you came out of the coma, you mentioned that your husband brought your children. That must have been traumatic for them. When you came out, what was it like being with them, and how was
Since
that?
they said their goodbyes.
They said their goodbyes.
So they said their goodbyes to me, but I didn't get to see my children right when I came out of coma, because I was still in ICU. I didn't get to see them for probably another good 2 weeks.
Wow.
But when I came out of my coma, I had actually had a birthday while under coma. So when I came out, my sister said, "Happy birthday." And I said, no, my birthday hasn't happened yet. And she said, "Yes, look." And she showed me cards, and she told me all the people who'd come to see me. And I looked at her and I said, "You know, this isn't about me." And she said, "What?" I said, "This is not about me." She said, "Yes, it is. These people all are concerned about you." I said, "No, this is bigger than me." And it was very early on that I realized that there was a reason that I was sick, and that there was something that I had to go through, and that whatever it was not about me.
Well, you know, that really brings me back to the time when my sister was very ill, and she was actually on her deathbed, and my sister did pass away about 2 weeks after that from breast cancer. And her whole issue, she had not told her children, and yet she was extremely ill. Her youngest child was 2 years old, and at this point, she's in the hospital, and I am there with her, and it's just the two of us. And my sister says to me, "You know, I'm waiting for a miracle." And I said to her, "Well, you know, what do you mean?" I believe I'm going to be cured. And my response to her was something, it just came to me. And my response to her was, and she did say, "I'm afraid." And I said to her, "Well, did it ever occur to you that God has already given you your miracle? You have 4 beautiful, healthy children. You have your family is all here with you. We're here to help you." And I said, maybe God wants you, you know, in a better place. And maybe that was your life lesson. And I didn't word it exactly like that, but it was something that I wanted her to feel at peace. And my biggest concern was I wanted her not to rob her children of having these last few days while she's awake, to give them a lasting message.
Absolutely.
Live your life well, you know, this is the time I have been given to share with you. Let's take it to the next step so that I'm not missing out on anything between us.
I call it the gift of knowing.
Yes.
And my being diagnosed and awaiting a transplant, not knowing if I would live or die, not knowing if I received transplant, even if I would live or die, allowed me to have conversations I otherwise wouldn't have had. It allowed me to finish the scrapbooks with my kids' pictures, so they would have something to remember, like the times.
In the event.
It allowed me, with each of my children, I got a box of stationery, and I wrote them each about 45 letters.
Wow.
Yes.
Letters on marriage, on relationships, on sex, on dating, on drugs, on education, on how I define, a life well lived, on friendship, right? On the right clothes, the things that if I wouldn't be here,
this is a guidebook here.
But if I wasn't here to tell others that my daughter or my son could, when they were sitting there trying to figure out what would mommy say.
Have you ever thought of, because that is something I think a lot of people who are thrust into these situations, sometimes you just don't know what to do, and then sometimes you get caught up into self-pity, and I can see that being very natural. Perhaps this kind of guide could help as you're navigating
I learned
through.
Is you have to hold to realities.
Interesting.
You have to hold the reality that we're all going to die.
And that is a reality.
We don't have any control of when that is.
I think if I was put in the position of Jennifer, having to leave a letter for her children, it's hard to even talk about being a mother, leaving a letter because you're departing. I am hoping that I would have the presence of mind to do that. Now that my children are older, it feels different, but if I was going to leave a letter to them, I would just ask them to love God and to love themselves. I would start there, and not from an egoic sense. I'm talking to love yourself by getting to know who you really are at your soul level. I had a sister that died of ovarian cancer, and she was just 38 years old, and she left a 3-year-old, and it was devastating because it just seems so unfair. It seems so unfair. When people die, you still have a relationship with them. You may not have a relationship of them being present, but there comes a time when you have it spiritually. So that's what I did, and I leaned in to being the best aunt I could to my niece, and that is growing, and I'm really happy about that because we do live through our children, but that was really quite devastating, and I learned that we have to be resilient. Jennifer's story reminded me a lot of my sister's, in that here is a young, beautiful, smart woman having to cope with an end-of-life situation. And the community rallied, as you've learned in the tape, to keep her alive. But she talks about a lot. It changed her. It really made her lean into her purpose. And I connect on that because Brooklyn Savvy is all about mission and purpose, right? It's not fun. It's about mission and purpose. So that's how I connect with her. It was very inspiring to witness her story. And, she's bringing her all. And you've seen her on Brooklyn Savvy, and you've seen the work that she's doing in the social justice arena. Mental health and mental illness conversations have heightened exponentially post-COVID, but we've been having these conversations for years. Rahim, who's living with bipolar disorder, explains to us how he navigates this.
Go with a definition of it. Mental illness is an illness of the brain. And most times people say illness of the mind, but we want to really bring it to the biological level. So illness of the brain. And it says it's caused by chemical imbalances. And mental illness can be genetic, right? So there's a genetic component caused by chemical imbalance that affects the way you think, the way you feel, and the way you behave. So there's all these different components to mental illness, right? So that's if you want to give a broad overview. And each mental illness has a behavioral, has a physiological, has an emotional component to it. So let's say depression, right? So we talk about depression, getting out of bed, you can feel sad and heavy. There's suicidal ideation, that goes to the cognitive component of depression. So each mental illness has those particular attributes.
So is there a chemical imbalance also related to depression, or is it something else that drives depression?
Well, yes. So there can be a chemical imbalance component to depression. Let's say we're talking about clinical depression. That has a chemical imbalance component. But you can also have depression stemming from grief or stemming from trauma. And that component, that can actually
That's emotional, I imagine.
Emotional and environmental. I speak at support groups. I speak at NAMI family to family support groups, National Alliance on Mental Illness. I'm sure you're familiar with those that organization. And I have parents ask me all the time, so, how you do in relationships, right? And I think that question is somebody going to love my child when I'm not here, right? But I think it's a very valid question. And for me personally, I say, listen, the divorce rate in the country, you had a show about divorce, is 50%, right? If you don't take care of yourself as an individual, you could have trust issues and somebody doesn't want to be with you.
Exactly.
But for me, I have to take care of myself, mental illness or not. And once you take care of yourself, relationships, I believe, are possible, regardless.
I just want to share personal information. My brother was diagnosed with schizophrenia. How, as a family member, do you give him the assistance in terms of he accepting that he has this? My whole family seems to deal with this in denial, in a manner of denial. And certain things can trigger a bad response, like the holidays. The death of my mom last November, like total denial that there's a family, or he insists that I'm his cousin when he knows full well I'm his sister. So it's these kind of things is that just him escaping? I mean,
Or is it a symptom of the disease, a condition of disease?
Is it that he's on the wrong meds? I mean,
Well,
I don't know.
You mentioned a couple of key things in there. First one is acceptance. Acceptance is the first piece towards wellness and recovery.
Meaning, as a person, you have to accept
As a person,
it.
you have to accept. But also, our family members have to accept as well. But the first key to recovery and moving beyond, I believe, the symptoms is saying, yes, there's something wrong with me. And I have to get that treatment. I don't know how it's going to happen. At least for me, I didn't know how it was going to happen. But I came to a place of acceptance early. So I think that's one of the key first steps. Then you also asked about, so I believe, for me personally, I believe that each mental illness is different, right? So, and each person is different. So bipolar disorder will manifest itself differently in somebody else because we all have our personalities. So I think, and another thing, language is
your
important.
personalities.
That person has bipolar disorder.
They're
Is
not
bipolar.
Right.
That person
They're
has
not-
cancer.
right.
Is not cancer.
Right.
And each individual personality is different too. So the way your brother may manifest schizophrenia might also be a function of his personality.
Right.
And
Maybe a fantasy or what have you.
Well, and the other thing I would say is that it is, having your family accept it can be really important toward you accepting it because you don't want to be rejected by your family. So that's really important. And I think that the support that a family can give somebody in terms of having them maintain their medication and their treatment is hugely important. I mean, I see the flip side of it sometimes, which is I see kids come to us, young adults that are living with us, that start taking medication, become stabilized or doing well, and then have, their families, and I understand this, will say, well, you don't really need that medication, you're doing really well, and they will stop taking it, and then you sort of see people regress again. So I think the support of family is so important, and the acceptance both of the condition but also of the treatment is really, really important.
And I think it's important to understand that for him, he's not receiving medication, and so because he's not receiving medication or taking medication, it
changes the way he will articulate things, the way he perceives
His own perception.
things,
Right.
his perception. And so understand that that he really, whatever he's thinking he sees or he's experiencing is real to him. And so I think that goes back to just understanding that he may be articulating things that sound not, like weird, but in reality, there may be some meaning in that.
Because I know of a case with a young man who had the bipolar disorder, and the family hadn't seen him for 3 weeks, and they found him and he was not alive. So it's so important for there to be real family engagement and contact. Mindfulness is recommended as a treatment for some people who experience common mental health problems such as stress, anxiety, and depression. It's also for those who simply want to improve their mental health and well-being. We spoke to Clarisa Romero about mindfulness and its benefits.
So the formal definition by Dr. John Kabat-Zinn of mindfulness is bringing your attention to the present moment. So it's present moment attention with intention. You want to be in the present moment. We want to be in this conversation, not thinking
And
about...
we're present. This is I'm being mindful because I'm looking you in the eye, and I am talking to you right now.
And so it's present moment awareness in a non-judgmental way. And
Now let's
that's,
talk about what does
yes.
that look like?
And that needs to get clarified because we live in a world of polarity. We're constantly judging.
We
It's what
gotta
we're
judge.
wired.
We need to be judging something sometimes,
We're
right?
wired to judge.
Right.
So that's our human nature.
So why are we going against our human nature?
Well, because it causes a lot of suffering and pain.
I get it.
And
yes.
once we start becoming more mindful of a lot of times, when you start becoming more present moment aware, you start realizing what thought patterns you have. And sometimes, because this is not me saying it, this is the research, we are wired to be more prone to pay attention to negativity. So a lot of times we get...
So give me an idea, what does that look like?
Well, I will tell you actually exactly how that looks like, because that's what happened to me, and that's how I came until being a mindful practitioner, or mindful, practitioner. Let's say, not meaning as in having a business, but just in a personal, aspect. I went through a series of trauma. I dealt with a divorce, the loss of my father. I lost my house and my job all within 9 months.
Oh, give me a break.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
So
that's a lot.
Any one of those are
One
enough to
alone,
knock you off,
but
off your feet. But I experienced all of them within 9 months. And needless to say, I was in an extreme deep depression, and I didn't want to get out of bed. I felt like I don't know who I am. I don't know how I'm going to move on. I don't know what I'm going to do. I just stopped caring. I felt like the world is cruel, and I was just in that loop and feeling sorry about myself.
But only you could get yourself out of that loop.
Absolutely. No one can do that for you. No one can do that for you. You have to find that willpower.
Right.
And, I do have a background in mental health. And so finally I started trying to snap out of it and say, I have to help myself. I have to want to get out of this. But, time had passed at this point of just being in this loop. So I started doing a lot of research, and I came across information about meditation. And it was overwhelming because there's so many different kinds of meditations.
Right.
And I started practicing different, and which I still do to this day: transcendental, primordial sound, chanting, visualization. And then I stumbled upon mindfulness. And I started learning more and more about what mindfulness entails, this present moment awareness, sitting and analyzing, and that metacognition, when you start thinking about your thinking, and what am I saying to myself, and how is this making me feel?
So your inner dialogue, so to speak.
Absolutely.
When you're running, when you're speculating and you're going in a negative direction, stopping that.
Well, and the third aspect that we didn't discuss of the definition of mindfulness is having that compassion and acceptance, because
of yourself
and others.
Right.
But first you have to have it for yourself. You can't have compassion for other people if you don't have compassion for yourself. As much as we think sometimes, I am compassionate towards other people, but just not to myself. No, it doesn't work that way. You have to learn how to have compassion and acceptance for yourself first, and then you can give that to others.
Now, when you speak of compassion, speaking of having a basic caring for other people, or is it more than that?
It's definitely
Is it more than that?
definitely more
So
than
when
that.
you say compassion, because that's another word that's big, you know, like diversity. Then there's
Big, and
compassion
sometimes
and
people
love.
get,
Love's
yes,
a big word.
and sometimes
It's like,
people think of those words as fluffy as
exactly.
well.
Like
Weakness.
you're a compassionate person. You're so compassionate. What is
Right.
that? What is that from your perspective?
Right. Well, from my perspective, and also a lot of research behind each of those aspects of the definition of mindfulness, the present moment awareness, there's a lot of brain science behind each of those components, which is why I guess I could say I became so fascinated with the concept
Now,
of mindfulness.
by the brain science, I was reading that mindfulness can help rewire your brain. What does that mean, to rewire the brain?
Well,
change my synapses? My what? What does that mean?
All of the above.
Wow.
It's very fascinating. So in the last 10 to 15 years, we've had revolutionary discoveries. So we used to think that our brain was fixed after a certain age, right? You're set for life, that's it, you're doomed, new neurons will get created. But when functional MRIs, this is what happened, that as our technology gets more improved, and we have all these new technologies, before we had a picture of the brain. Right? So when people meditated and they felt better, they did not know exactly why. But when functional MRIs came into existence and we were able to have a video, and we were able to, there were a lot of studies done showing how someone after just 8 weeks, what was happening in the brain? Did it look the same? What changes? And then they realized that the brain had changed, and what was changing was, and then that leads us to additional discoveries of our emotional brain.
Does it make you healthier in your brain? Meaning to change that brain?
Well, you know what the studies have shown? Each thought, and we have 60 to 70,000 thoughts on average a day.
Every
human. And every single thought releases a chemical. So that to me, when I first heard that, I was like, what? Every single thought releases a chemical. So when you have positive, let's label this. Let's give it a judgment, right? When you have a
panic
positive,
is real. By the
panic is so
about the thoughts that you're thinking,
and that is so real.
That's my, I'm pretty positive, but I will go panicky.
Mindfulness and meditation has really changed my life, and it's made it deeper, richer, and fuller. I've gone to the Garrison Institute to learn more about meditation. I've gone to the Omega Institute meeting. And what I'm saying is, and I'm in church, that I'm deep into meditation, and it is powerful. You want synchronicities in life? Meditate. You want to understand the other person? Meditate. Primarily, you want to hear the spirit inside? The only way you're going to be able to learn your discernment is through meditation. Because the more you meditate, the more you're able to hear you or God. Just that simple. That's all the time we have for Brooklyn Savvy. So meditate on that. Bye.